Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the studio, and let's spend a little bit of time talking about books and what we're reading. So I started off with a huge pile over here, and I've whittled it down to 6. Otherwise, you and I will be here all day talking about what I've got on the shelves. But with a little bit of focus on drawing to start off with, I'd like to recommend this book, Keys to Drawing by Bert Dodson. So I found this again a few years ago, and it had been a book I'd come across in my younger drawing days. I had forgotten just how good it was. So this is a book. Let's see what Bert Dodson says about it. Anyone who can hold a pencil can learn to draw with some degree of proficiency, Bert Dodson complains. It proclaims, not complains. In this book, he shares a complete drawing system that you can use for any subject or type of drawing, even if you doubt your ability to draw. Well, you know, this is exactly the sort of thing that I really espouse. So his book is very comprehensive in terms of concept and technique and how to observe and all of that sort of thing. If you've watched any of my videos or taken any of my classes, you'll recognize some of the stuff he talks about. And the examples that he gives in the book are varied. There are all sorts of approaches. He shows his students' work. He shows, famous artists' work. He shows techniques using different methods of rendering. It's just packed with information. So this was originally released, I guess, in the 80s, and this is Northlight's Classic Edition's 30th anniversary version of the book, Keys to Drawing. I highly recommend it for your art bookshelf. If you are a painter, an artist who draws, even a sculptor, the information in here is extremely useful for you. So moving on, let's talk about another type of drawing, pen and ink. And here's another classic that I really would recommend. It's called Rendering in Pen and Ink by Arthur Guptill. And this is a reprint of a classic edition that was put out in the 1930s. I can't remember what the initial, the name of the very first, the 1930s version was, but this one was reprinted in the 1970s and then again more recently. It is just the classic, most comprehensive tome. So Arthur Guptill was part of the Watson Guptill Publishing Company. And what is said in the front piece about this book is long been regarded as the most comprehensive book ever published on the subject of ink drawing. Long out of print and until now only a collector's item, it is once again available in this new and updated version. So because this was put out in the 1930s originally, and because Arthur Guptill himself was an artist who worked in that time period, stylistically, much of the information is really of that period from the early 1900s. And it is just fantastic. So if you are interested in pen and ink, and you've been messing around and you're doing some sketchy stuff and it's interesting, you're trying different textures and this, that, and the other, but you'd like a little bit more of a rigorous approach and to understand a bit more what can be done, there is nothing like this book for taking you through all the techniques and the ways of looking at your subject matter, different ways of rendering your subject matter, step by step, the whole bit. It's just an amazing book. And there are also some fascinating examples of other artists through time, how they have approached particular subject matter. He's got something like 300 illustrations in here. It's just really fantastic. So this is a nice big heavy book for your art bookshelf, Rendering in Pen and Ink by Arthur Guptill. So moving from that into another book on drawing, this is Drawing Masterclass. This one is 100 Creative Techniques of Great Artists by Guy Noble. And what this really is, it covers so much, but it's not just, hey, here are these artists and here are their drawings. This is the technique and the materials that they used as well. So drawing is one of the most enduring artistic disciples. The simple act of putting pencil or pen to paper can be used by artists to plot and plan larger paintings or can be a medium for the creation of masterpieces in their own right. This book showcases 100 drawings by the world's greatest artists, describing their approach and techniques and allowing you to weave some of this magic into your own work. This is why I'm recommending this book to you, because it shows you not only, here's Max Beckmann, one of his drawings, it shows you not only the drawing, but also describes the materials and the method, and some more information also about the artists themselves. Let me find you another one to, oh, and also some wonderful um, discussion on abstract drawing. And let's see, there was a lovely Degas in here. This sort of thing, Degas, the materials he used, how he went about plotting out his drawings. So you can see that this book is full of really good stuff. If you're a beginner to intermediate artist, or you want to be an intermediate artist, or even if you are somebody working as a professional, there is a ton of information here to pull on. So, Drawing Masterclass, 100 Creative Techniques of Great Artists. Now I'm really kind of going through all of these classic books that are coming back out right now. And one of them is Josef Albers' The Interaction of Color. And this is the 50th anniversary edition, came out a few years ago. And so a Josef Albers book is not something that you just sort of sit down and read. And it's not color theory. It's not like, color wheel and this is how you make purple and this is how you make green. This is a book about the interaction of color. What happens when you put colors next to each other, when you put colors over top of each other in terms of transparency, how you can create the illusion of transparency, how the paint that you mix up on the palette when you go to put it on the painting and it doesn't look the way you intended it, it's because of the colors around and how you kind of understand that. So the book is divided up into these smaller lessons at the front, where he deals with one subject at a time, and then refers to the color plates at the back. As you see, there are quite a number, which illustrate the information. So this is used often as a course book to study from, with students cutting up pieces of paper and trying to emulate some of these exercises. But you don't need to do that in order to understand what's going on. There's a lot of information, especially if you are already working with paint and already in it and trying to figure out what to do next. This book really has a lot of information, and I recommend it as one of those ones where you read a little bit about it and think about it and look for the examples in real life, and then likewise move on to the next lesson. So this is another good one for the reference shelf. All right, now we move on to book number 5. Now this book is kind of funny. So last summer when I was doing an art class, everyone kept saying, well, what about watercolor? Show us watercolor techniques. And I'm like, well, I'm not like great at watercolor. And so I accepted that as a challenge to myself to become better at watercolor. And I did so by using the lessons and exercises in this book. This is so great. It's the Tate Watercolor Manual, Lessons from the Great Masters. So I'm all about looking back in history of what was done before and learning from the masters in one way or another. It doesn't always mean, making rigorous copies in the art museum, but it does mean understanding, breaking down how they did it, what they did it with, and trying some of that in your own work. So the way the Tate Watercolor Manual works, which I found to be very approachable and something I could work into my pretty busy schedule, was they have you take pieces of watercolor paper and sort of divide them up into smaller areas, sort of like 3x5 little areas. And in those, you do the series of step-by-step exercises to render sort of small paintings based on examples from the great masters, and also, showing the technique of how each is done. So you're led, step by step through how to create a particular look, or what you're trying to emulate, sometimes with a mix of techniques and that sort of thing. But what is wonderful is by the time you have finished this, and what I did was I just set a day aside every week to do the next chapter and the next chapter. It was relaxing, but it also, I felt, because I was doing these little pictures, that I was making some progress. I had something to show for my work. I didn't have to wait until I had drawn out a huge painting and then had it go south, which is always not great for the ego, And so when you're learning something new, like watercolor, which is very different for me from oil painting, this book really made it approachable, and now I feel that my watercolors I'm not at the point of mastery, for sure. I've got a lot of practice to do, but I understand what's going on now, and I've been able to pull off a few reasonable pieces. So that's a good start. There we go, Tate Watercolor Manual. And now lastly, I've got this book, which is not an art book per se, although it has the word art in the title. And this keys in really to this idea of observation that I'm always on about. To observe, we have to have an understanding about what we're trying to observe. Otherwise, we're just sort of looking around, right? There's a big difference between I'm just looking at stuff to I'm actually observing what is happening. And part of the problem is that if we're used to other people feeding us images on the television, on Instagram, or whatever, we're not taking the time to observe ourselves necessarily in a deeper manner than, hey, this is a pretty picture that I'm going to put on my Instagram. So how do we go about learning? How do we take that to the next step? Well, if you're dealing with landscape and natural subject matter, there are some really great books such as this one, The Lost Art of Reading Nature's Signs. Use outdoor clues to find your way, predict the weather, locate water, that's always useful, track animals and other forgotten skills. So this is the sort of information that when you read it, you'll go, wait a minute, I knew some of that, but hey, this other stuff is pretty cool. And it's just little bits of information that you can start seeing yourself in the world around you and then incorporate that information into your work. It can be something about the way things grow or the way grasses grow or the side of the tree that the moss is on or whatever. That when you add that to your painting or your drawing, just adds a degree of observation that makes it stand out from somebody who just didn't bother to take the time or didn't even know that that information existed to learn. So I highly recommend books of this nature. Every artist loves art books, but it's also important to do what we can to expand our knowledge in general, science, the world around us, history, whatever it happens to be, as well as art history and art techniques and all of that kind of thing. But when we're out in nature, this book will make you want to go for a walk and start looking at things. It's got some really great tidbits in there. So, The Lost Art of Reading Nature's Signs by Tristan Gooley. And there we go. There's a wrap for the moment. I have many, many more books I'd like to tell you about, but I think 6 at a time is about right. And I'm very interested to hear any good books that you have, any good art books you've come across or something that you have seen just come out. Just drop me a line at erwhelan@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.